Welcome back to Formula 1 2020 testing. Today, day 2. What went down? What did we learn? All will be discussed in today's video. So if you're new around here and you want to keep up to date with 2020 testing, you know what to do. You know where that subscribe button is down below. And also, if you enjoyed today's video, feel free to like. Enough messing. Let's talk about testing. Another quiet day. On the whole, not as quiet as yesterday, and I finished yesterday's video by saying that each day I want to try and focus on a few different teams. You know, I don't want to spend all week talking about Ferrari. I want to try and mix things up, spice things up just a little bit each day. So today I'm going to talk about two different teams, focus on two teams today. And also, at the end of yesterday, I said expect a few teams to push a little bit harder as the week goes on and expect a few red flags, expect a few mistakes. We saw that, but only one red flag. And that was only with about 17 minutes to go, where your time-topping driver, Kimi Raikkonen, pulled to a halt. But apart from that, only that red flag, which was still a big shock. But lots to learn and lots of unique little details from testing today. I think it's best to start with our lovely big grid that you have seen on screen for the last few seconds. I have added tyre information in today. I wasn't too sure if you wanted to know that, but I feel it makes sense to throw it in there. So I've thrown it in on the end, but as always, I said yesterday, and I will always say this, if there's anything extra you think I should have on there, let me know. Let me know in the comments below and I can throw it in. But Kimi Raikkonen, top of the timesheets in the second half of the day, a 1:17.098, not as quick as Lewis Hamilton's quickest time from yesterday, which is in the bottom left-hand corner, which I thought would be quite fun just to keep an eye on over the week to see if that lap time is beaten, so that will stay there for the moment. Sergio Perez, P2, that racing point on times anyway, looking not too bad, although I've got to say it every video or else I will be told off. It's only testing and everything we do have to take with a pinch of salt. But Racing Point, which is basically the 2019 Mercedes, is looking good. But of course, the 2019 Mercedes won the World Championship, so of course it's going to look good. Ricciardo P3, but Renault not without their issues today. Albon P4, Gasly P5, AlphaTauri. Sebastian Vettel, who jumped in the car finally in 2020 in the afternoon session in P6. George Russell P7 was actually in the top 5 at the halfway point today. Williams, it seems to be running a lot smoother this year. They had a few issues today, but not too many to report. Charles Leclerc did the morning session for Ferrari in P8. Lewis Hamilton P9, his best lap time though on the C1 tyre. Lando Norris P10, and the three drivers outside the top 10, Romain Grosjean, Esteban Ocon and Valtteri Bottas. So, like I said yesterday, I'll kind of do an overview of what went down in the day, and then I'll focus a little bit more intricately on two teams. And the two teams I want to talk about today is Mercedes and Haas. First though, laps. I always say laps completed is a brilliant representative kind of figure that we can actually learn a few bits and bobs about. And Kimi Raikkonen on 134 laps, his was the first car to break down right at the end of the session, the first red flag. But as we said last year, it's not awful, cars breaking down. Although it means the team have got a little bit more work to do overnight, it means that they can see what's wrong with the car and hopefully act on that. Realistically, you'd rather everything works, but at least you'd rather it break down now than in Australia and find a big issue a couple of races into the season, if that kind of makes sense. But 134 laps, very respectable. 145 for Sergio Perez. Ricciardo only 41. Issues, I was going to say all day in that Renault, but not even 100 laps between the two Renault drivers, only 91. The first team to not actually hit 100 laps at testing this year. Slight worries there for Renault, but again, it's only day 2. You'd rather hit the issues now, so I'll hold back on going too harsh on them. Red Bull with Alex Albon, 132. Gasly, 146. Some mighty stints from some of these drivers today. Sebastian Vettel, finally feeling a little bit better. 72 laps for him and 49 for Leclerc. Williams and Russell, 116. It's just ridiculous numbers. 106 for Hamilton and 77 for Bottas. almost 200 laps for Mercedes. Bottas did have an issue though and was pulled back into the garage late on. Norris was able to do 136 laps in the McLaren, 158, oh my goodness, for Romain Grosjean. Any driver who does over 100 laps, fair play, but over 150, that's insanity. 50 for Esteban Ocon, who also had issues in his Renault, and Bottas, as I mentioned, 77, and he was pulled into the garage. A few spins from a few drivers today. We still saw the Red Bull was a little bit twitchy. We saw Raikkonen have a spin in that third sector, and actually it's that final chicane which is the most predominant area, I would say, that's catching out quite a few of the drivers. But I believe from what I have seen over on the Twitter, which, you know, isn't the most reliable source, but there is supposedly a headwind going into that final sector, so that could potentially be a bit of an issue there. But we did see a spin from Gasly, a spin from Raikkonen, a couple of spins from Alex Albon. That Red Bull seems to be right on the edge, but it's not looking too bad, especially in terms of times, quite consistent. And on the C2 tyres, P4 and 5 for Albon and Gasly, that's very impressive. Raikkonen's time on the C5, a little bit alarming, considering Hamilton was able to do a 16.9 yesterday on one of the harder compounds. Also considering that the Renault and the Racing Point were on the C3 and weren't a million miles away. A little bit scary, but it's testing. I don't want to read too much into it. But yes, the two teams I want to focus on today are Haas and Racing Point. Haas, mainly because 158 laps of Romain Grosjean is ridiculous. And yesterday, Kevin Magnussen just got over 100 laps. But historically, the team have been, I suppose, a little bit lackluster when it comes to testing. Often not reaching that 100 laps a day mark. Often last year as well, we saw the car breaking down several times in the first week. Haas was breaking down more than it was doing laps. They seemed to be in real trouble. And of course, over the season, we saw that all those issues in testing, sadly for the team, did come to fruition once we got a little bit later into the season. So, in one hand, it's brilliant that it's not breaking down this year. They're getting in some fantastic running, and the car doesn't look awful. Doesn't look amazing, but it looks like it's going to be able to actually fight for some good points this season. Again, it's only testing. But 158 laps is fantastic. But I hate to report, ladies and gents, our first crash of testing. Oh man, our first kind of crash at testing. Romain Grosjean, outside of, well, it was going through turn 5 and oversteered into a spin, which is quite unnatural. A few concerned faces at the team. It was right at the end of the day, and it was right at the end of his stint. So I wonder whether, and we sometimes see this, cars do super long race runs and then try and give it full beans for a couple of laps at the end just to get the maximum out of that car. So it's not an awful time to crash, but it's not ideal. And although he did end up in the barriers, this is making me scream a little bit, but although he ended up in the barriers and there was damage to that rear wing, he was able to get going again. He was able to make it back to the pits. No red flag at this point. So good job from Grosjean to get it home. Supposedly the team weren't too concerned. Of course, they weren't happy seeing it in the barriers, but I think that's a really strong day's work from Haas today, and I just didn't really expect that. I didn't talk about them much yesterday. Their intentions for this year, you would imagine to be at least a little bit more competitive than last season. I imagine that's their target. But also to get to that front of the midfield up against Racing Point, McLaren and Renault, I think will be difficult this year. But at least to be in the mix at certain Grand Prix, I think that's what they're aiming for. So a strong day today. I believe the team are splitting the session tomorrow. So it's Grosjean in the morning and K-Mag in the afternoon, which is an interesting way of doing things. But that's how they're splitting it up this week. I'm feeling good for Haas so far. Long way to go. Still 5 more days of testing. Four more days. Blimey. It's running out. It's almost here. But good start from Haas. And that's kind of just what I want to mention. Considering last year testing wasn't great whatsoever. But before we go, come on. I cannot mention Mercedes. It was obvious I was going to talk about them today. We've got a bit of a revelation in the world of Formula One. And whilst I'm not the biggest engineering geek, I'm certainly not an engineering head usually, it's quite cool. I will leave super technical analysis to other people. If you've been a fan for the channel for a while, you will know that is certainly not my strong suit. I'm trying to get better, and Stuart Chainbear is helping me get there slowly and slowly, but I am struggling. So, Mercedes have a moving steering wheel. Wow, that's so cool. Rather than moving left to right, it moves forwards and backwards, which again, I'm making this sound really stupid, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really quite ingenious. They've asked the FIA, obviously, over the winter to check if it's legal. They seem to have found a bit of a loophole, which is what Mercedes are usually so good at doing, but they seem to have beat the competition. And it was fantastic seeing other teams analysing the TV footage of the Mercedes. So this is my untechnical analysis. So it's probably, if you like me, you like to know a little bit, but not too much. Hopefully this will do it justice and you'll kind of understand what's going on. What it actually does is unclear at this certain time, but good old Ted Kravitz believes it's to cool down the tyres. So that's good. I can understand that's a good thing. So Hamilton, he's going down the straight. He pulls the steering wheel towards him, and before he's going into the corner, pulls it back. And supposedly that should help cool down the tyres, potentially make them quicker in a straight line. So it's very simple in terms of what it does and how it works, but it could have a big effect. And there were a few worried faces up and down the grid. The media centre supposedly was absolutely electric with this new information. And it's just cool that we're showing up to testing and teams are trying something a little bit different. And very easily, this could be made illegal after race 1 if they're 10 seconds in front. I doubt that would be happening. But I just think it's cool. And I definitely think it's worth noting. And also, while we're on the topic of Mercedes, smashing it once again with laps. Although Bottas did have an issue late on, left the pit lane, had to jump out the car because the car stopped working. Bit of an issue. But again, like I said with Alfa Romeo, you've got to have some kind of issue so you can learn, understand the car, and hopefully get to Melbourne with a pretty much perfect car. We can dream. The teams can dream anyway. And apart from that, there were a few technical issues at Williams. I know Russell had an electrical issue at the back of the car about lunchtime. But apart from that, relatively plain sailing for most of the teams once again. So tomorrow, expect them to turn it up a little bit. Often what we see, or what I've noticed from testing over the last few years, is on the final day before the break, we see a few hot laps to try and end the week on a high to get those headlines. So I would expect Hamilton's time of a 1:16.9 to be beaten. Who's it going to be? That's the big question. So, hey, let's have a bit of fun. I want to know your guesses in the comments below. I think it could be Sergio Perez in that Racing Point. That's my gut feeling anyway. But yes, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Testing review will be with you tomorrow as quickly as I possibly can. So, if you want to keep up to date with Formula One in 2020, and if you've enjoyed today's video, feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.